Thank you, and welcome to our program today. I just want to kind of do a little table setting about what we're looking at, and then we're going to just dive into a conversation about this work together. So the photographs that are the primary focus of our gathering today were made by the photographer Carl Van Vechten of his lover, Mark Lutz, in the 1930s and 1940s. Carl Van Vechten, you might know him best as a Harlem-based photographer who is best known for documenting the creatives in working in and around Harlem or coming to New York City. So theater performers, dancers, artists, writers, pretty much every famous person that you can think of who was active in those decades, Carl Van Vechten brought to his studio, which was really just part of his apartment that he threw some backdrops up on and made their portraits. We at the museum have many, many thousand portraits by Carl Van Vechten that are primarily of these kinds of folks. So Marian Anderson, Ella Fitzgerald, you name it, we have them. And these photographs came to us primarily from the man pictured here, Mark Lutz, who was Carl Van Vechten's first portrait subject when he took up photography in the early 1930s. He was a test subject for lighting. He was Carl's muse. From what we can piece together, they were lovers for about a decade and then remained lifelong friends. And Mark was the recipient of one of every photograph that Carl took, and he took many, many photographs over the course of the 1930s and 1940s. What is unique to our collection is that we also have a lot of portraits of Mark. So there are Carl Van Vechten archives in other places, particularly at Yale University at the Beinecke Library, but we don't find images of Mark anywhere really except for the PMA. And we have no fewer than several hundred gelatin silver prints. Some of them are on view upstairs in the show Dialogue or Dance. And then we also have color 35 millimeter slides, and that is the material we will be looking at today. These slides have been here since Mark Lutz passed away in 1969. He bequeathed all of Carl Van Vechten's work to the museum, and that included these slides. And they're exactly what you think, right? So we're looking at this very large, but this is a Kodachrome slide that you could plunk in a slide projector. And I think we have 600 of Mark in the collection, which our intrepid collections manager, Erin Florence, who's here today, brought our attention to many years ago and said these are really exciting. We should spend some time with them. And I, thinking about the show and thinking about understanding this relationship between Carl and Mark better, scanned them all over the summer, reached out to Matthew because I knew he was very interested in them, and we decided to bring them out today and look at them for the first time in a public setting. And the way that I've organized the talk and the discussion, we're going to look at some of this work together. Every artist on the panel picked a handful of these pictures that they were most interested in, and we're beginning with the ones where we all had some sort of consensus around the picture. And then we will toggle back and forth between each of these artists' work and other pictures of Mark Lutz that they chose, really trying to bring these pictures in conversation with artists' work today, artists who are thinking about intimacy, about queerness, and trying to sort of begin to place these slides and give them a context and sort of give them a life outside of the archive that they've been sitting in for 50 years unattended to. I will say there are no captions for any of these, and that is largely because we have no titles for them. So the slides are unmarked. From what I can piece together, I think they were taken between 1938 and 1941. That's just based on other, fashion information or how they relate to other pictures of Mark that we have in black and white. But I just wanted to frame that there are a lot of questions that we have about this work that are unanswered, and we will not be able to uncover all of them today. But I'm hoping that we can at least get a start together and try and understand these pictures a little better. So I think the place that I want to kick off our discussion is actually about looking at these at all, because these are, a slide is different than a print. We have no indication that these were intended, though they came to a museum, which is an institution that shows work. We don't really have a clear indication that Mark would want us to show them. We've deliberated a lot before bringing these slides out at all about what that means, particularly for someone like Mark Lutz, who we know so little about because he, by third-hand accounts, was very closeted in his lifetime. So we have no letters between he and Carl Van Vechten because they destroyed them all at the end of their lives. We don't know a lot about his feelings about these images, but obviously we're all looking at them today, so we did decide that looking at them was valuable and important. But I know everyone on this panel thinks a lot about the archive and thinks a lot about how to navigate this material, so I just want to open it up and talk about how do you think about these pictures, and what about them made you think we should talk about them?
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you all for coming. I just don't think anything else exists like this. There's no other documentation of a homosexual relationship that exists in vivid color from the 1930s. It's just completely unique, and I think that is absolutely reason enough to talk about them. I totally agree that there's these concerns of what people would have wanted in their lifetimes. Legally, he did bequeath these to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and so I guess, at some point he must have, well, it's unclear whether, because I understand of the prints that you have of Van Vechten, there are no male nudes, and that the collection of prints was edited by Mark Lutz before it entered the collection. Yet these, if I'm understanding this right, these entered the collection after his death, and so he probably didn't have the chance to go through them, and we imagine maybe remove prints that some of the spicier things we'll be seeing today. One thing, just to kick it off, I feel like one thing that's very apparent in these is this yellow face makeup, and I know that we've all been kind of wondering and researching about that. And I think this is an interesting pairing to start off with because we see him wearing the yellow pancake makeup in both this kind of beautiful shirt and this is a picture with Carl Van Vechten, and also in this, I don't know, kimono or whatever it is that he's wearing there. And maybe Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about the makeup?
Well, I'm not a historian on this, so I don't know for sure, but I do believe that, 20 years before, this was the only type of makeup that men would wear to be on screen, like in a black and white film. And you are a historian, so you might know more. But I don't know. I think that they may have just been kind of using the tradition of banana. I think it's called banana powder. I think they might have just been using that tradition for black and white film and kind of incorporating it here. But if any of you know, we would like to know more information.
I just love that. That's also my understanding of it, and I love that there's this kind of it's a mistake. They're just so used to shooting in black and white that they have made this flip, and they, the film comes back later. You don't get to see exactly what you're getting while you're shooting, and you'll see it throughout. Whatever the costume is, the makeup is the same, and I think that the work, part of its charm is the mistakes. We can see that this image is not exposed correctly, and you'll see lots of things that are just not in focus. And I think that part of it is they're just playing. This is private, and we're looking at, and I think probably putting on the makeup was a transformational process to enter into this state of play.
Mm-hmm. I also think that we do know that by this time, they didn't only use banana powder, but as someone particularly interested in kind of looking back and kind of taking things from generations before me, I also think about that incorporated into the play as well.
Yeah, Carl was definitely a novice. He took many, many photos, but he was I would describe him as a quantity over quality guy. He was self-taught. He was interested in building this archive of celebrated people, and also his lover, Mark, who we all love, but was not Marian Anderson, right? And I think the mistakes are part of the frenzy to do this. And I also, this is one thing that makes me feel like these color slides are in such a compressed time, because he's using this like outdated makeup. He's using a makeup that's designed specifically for black and white film in a color setting. And I would think there would be fewer of him with this makeup if they were developing film periodically over a long period of time, and there's an awful lot of the yellow pancake makeup in these slides.
Well, also I think some of them he seems to be shooting in black and white and color, so maybe the makeup was more designed for the black and white exposure, and the color exposure was kind of like a follow-up that wasn't as thought through. But yeah, he's just burning through this color film. There's so, like 8 shots of the same thing, and none of them are in focus. And this was not at a time when this was like cheap or easy to burn through color film like this. So I think I think about that scene in Blow Up, if you've seen that film about photography, but there's like the epic photo shoot scene where he's like on top of the model and like straddling her and dangling this camera in her face. And I just kind of think like that was the fantasy that they were living.
This is another one of the photos where we have some indication of time, because I believe this tie came from the 1939 World's Fair. There are some pictures. There's a few, most of these are taken in Carl Van Vechten's home, but there's a small handful of ones that are taken out of doors as well, and there are some of Mark proudly sporting this tie at the 1939 World's Fair in New York. So, but I do love this again, talking about his sort of slapdash way of working, where you see he's got this American flag, but you can see the like glitter curtain behind it through the flag, as well as in the bottom corner.
I thought it was just a glitter flag. Now I see.
They are incredible to look at. I think there's just something amazing about seeing this material in color, which we're like maybe more used to seeing pictures of people from this time in black and white. And just the like formal experimentation, because the fact that he was doing so many exposures of the same thing, there's one where he's doing this, there's one where he's like holding it around his neck, there's like, it's very many variations of the same thing. And I think that's part of like, he was learning photography as well. It was like something they were doing together. And also the idea of like traveling through the studio, I think is something probably that we'll end up talking about. But that tie with all the flags on it really makes me, it almost could be like a title image for the series, because so much of what they seem to be doing is using the studio to almost travel and have this kind of very gay exchange in private that they couldn't have in public.
That's making me think also of like learning to also be watched. Like he's learning to take photos and he's also learning how to direct the photos, but we get to see Mark kind of learning how to be posed and to be
totally
looked at like that.
I love this pose.
I love this one. Yeah, speaking of.
I do also think like the color in the way that you were talking about it. I was just talking to my students about Gordon Parks and those photographs of segregation, and the way that them being in color makes it feel a lot closer. Like if you think about like an image of segregation, you're thinking about something that feels very historic and dramatic, right? Like those images are not casual to think about, but something about seeing them in color makes it feel really personal, especially the pictures of families kind of doing banal things. And I think there's something about like a cheap curtain in color that makes it feel like the party store or something familiar. And obviously we'll talk about my work later, but like, you know, my studio is a corner of an apartment in Harlem also. And I am throwing pieces of fabric on the wall, and it's very immediate and often coming from a bargain store, you know? So I do think that like it makes it feel, many of the images look like they could be from the 70s, not from the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you know, Carl was a man who did not have to have a job, right? And color film was extremely new and incredibly expensive. So the analogy that I use of the slideshows you would do of your family vacation is apt, but not accessible to most people in the same way that it became in the 50s and 60s and 70s. This was an expensive and fickle process to work with, and one that, you know, you primarily I think was used and we can, maybe the frenzy of making these pictures mirrors this, right? It's used in the fashion industry. So, you know, fashion photographers for Vogue or Harper's or Elle would be using color film primarily to illustrate magazine covers in these years, and particularly going into the war. Maybe there's a reason that these stop in 1941 or 2. It could be that their relationship dissolved, but also just the way that there was scarcity everywhere, and it was hard to get things, even things that you couldn't necessarily afford to get.
I love these. So what are those things on his legs? They're like the little sweaters for his calves. I love that. And then, but the fact that they did 3 different backgrounds, it's like there's one with a prop, there's one in the show upstairs where they tried the lederhosen plus shirtless. You know, like, it's so, but it's like the strategies they're using aren't so different than things that we would employ today, where it's like, oh, maybe you could try this, maybe we could try it with a different background, and it's so kind of amazing to see the joy of it. Honestly, it looks like fun to me.
It's making me think about, I feel like I often have a conversation with students who are nervous about making something where I'm like, you know, you can make it and never show anyone. You know, but, you know, who knows what happens after you die. But they do look like fun. And it looks like people playing dress up, which is just such a sweet idea that these 2 men were just holed up in this apartment playing dress up.
I also love to imagine, like, something's not working, but hold that orange. And, like, that's the confidence of the orange is gonna do something. And I think it does.
Definitely.
Yeah, I don't know what the orange is doing for me that it works.
It does.
But it really works.
He thinks it works too. Like, he feels it, and I think that's why it works.
I'm sure we'll see it, but there's like a recurring pose of taking 2 objects like this.
Yeah.
And they try it in like a lot of different, and it's like, here's 2 ceramic ducks, here's 2 oranges. Forgive the reference, but Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, like, I don't know what to do with my hands moment, where they're just like trying to do something with their hands.
But I think that's so real. I mean, I was just directing something recently, and I kept noticing that, like, the main person in it would just kept coming out with props. It's like props do make a performer feel a little bit, like, less vulnerable, I think. So here are some props. Here are some perfect times.
This one I don't even know what they were going for exactly. It's kind of like, there's such a combination of like, you know, but the fact that we can see like the bakelite of that necklace in such vivid detail is incredible to me. And like, in some of the best ones, I think it's this, and he's trying to do like a cleavage thing too, maybe. Like, I love that there's like this almost kind of drag, and we'll see later, there's also these ones, there's a lot of where he's kind of experimenting with the way that pose implies gender. There's what later we'll see the difference of when he's dressed up as a sailor and what the bodily movements of that look like.
Yeah, and I mean, the bakelite necklace feels like something that could have belonged to someone else at the studio, because he's shooting at such a clip, and we're not seeing it in these images except for maybe the one with Winston Churchill, which we'll get to. But the studio is a social space, and so there are instances, not very well documented here, where, you know, you can look at Carl's log records at Yale and see that he photographed 20 people on August 4th, 1934. And so you know they were all in that space together, or at least some of them were. So it's an entire cast of a performance. They probably all came to Carl's house at once. And Mark was, a staple. He was an institution there as well. And so I do imagine that behind, where we can't see, behind Carl's camera, there are probably a lot of other participants, and some of these props, like the bakelite necklace, could have come from Carl's wife, which is an interesting sidebar thought, but also could have been, someone else who's in the studio, right, another actor or friend of theirs.
But then that makes me think about everyone being like, yes, do that, like the energy behind it also.
Yeah, it's impossible to know with these which ones are public and which ones are private, or, they're all private, but degrees of private, so.
Right, to your point.
Some of the, if you haven't gone upstairs, after this, go upstairs and see the black and white photographs. But some of them, like this one, just feels so earnest. Like there are these moments that really like cut through all the drama, and it's just like a beautiful picture of someone. We'll see one later that has, I think that's like one of the few natural light ones, that like orange one in my section. It's just like lit with natural light, and it feels completely sincere. Not that the others, I think, feel insincere. That's not quite the dynamic I mean to outline, but it just has this, it cuts through the drama, and we see this like very sweet image of just a person. Maybe as opposed to something like this.
Yeah, so I will say that a lot of, and Matt, you started talking about this earlier, a lot of the costuming in these comes from trips that the two of them actually took. So maybe not these ones, although we don't have the fullest sense of everywhere they went, but there's a great Matador outfit we'll get to that, oh, it's not next, but this really sweet one is next. But, you know, that they bought on a trip together and then are sort of bringing back out into the studio to play.
And I do think, Matt and I were talking about this morning, but I do think it's interesting to think about, you know, obviously we can talk from a perspective of it being 2024 about problems of using these textiles and these clothes, and that's its own conversation. But I do think in this moment to think about the like dexterity that they had to play with culture as being really different than the dexterity that they had to play with queerness. And so it was much easier to sort of like express a sense of otherness or fantasy or fancy or whatever we want to think of by sort of stepping outside of the world they're in through this form of travel, as opposed to like full drag or something that we might associate more with like images of queerness.
I also wonder if this has to do with the World's Fair. I don't know enough about the 1939 World's Fair, but I would imagine you could go and not only experience new technologies and things like that, but also other world cultures. And so I kind of like that the center point of this relationship of what we know of it is that they went to the World's Fair, and some of the ways that we're able to date these are also based on knowing that. This one is just incredible. I think this is like, this could have been taken yesterday.
Yeah, I had that same feeling when I saw it.
And isn't this the one that there's a black and white version upstairs? No, slightly different flowers picture.
Slightly different, but close, yeah.
There's a common impulse where he's like, let's cover you in flowers. And even though these ones are sort of dead, you know, there's ones with dahlias, there's a lot of flower works.
I also want to say that my introduction is just simply through this. So I know that they were closeted people in the world, but I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is how I'm getting to know you in the least closeted sense. Let me cover you with flowers.
Like, who knew they had this kind of tie-dye in the 40s? This looks like it's from the 70s. Yeah. And looks great. I would wear that.
Yeah, I love also that the textile does not fully cover. Like, there's this little sliver of bare chest coming out at the bottom corner. Another one where I'm like, is this imperfect or is this deliberate? I can't quite decide.
And also this, like, I think a very photographic impulse, or at least something that I feel a lot in my own studio, is like, well, I know it's a necklace, but if we put it on your head and you sit at the right angle, maybe we can convince everyone that it's a crown.
Totally.
And then the thing where the camera's like, I'm just going to describe what I actually see. Like, thanks for the gesture, but, and this kind of it's something I think about with Cloud Count a lot too, this sort of like, you can see that the angel wings are made out of tinfoil, but they're looking at the camera like, tell me I'm not an alien, and you're like, okay, you're an alien, like whatever you say. And I think that's like a very photography special attribute, is this like truth and intention maybe living layered on top of each other.
These are the sailor pictures.
Here we are.
I've been waiting. I love these. I mean, I have a particular interest in my own work in like the kind of gay uses of the sailor as an archetype, or the relationship between you know, sites of military installation and the development of queer cultures in those places, and homosocial spaces existing because of you know, war efforts and stuff. And so there's a whole series of these sailor pictures where he seems to be trying on these very masculine, like, butch poses. And I guess, you know, like, this is where the idea of, like, trade comes from. But I just think it's so, like, maybe in the next slide we have one of him, like, yeah, I love the, just, like, it's hilarious, honestly, just because it's, I guess, one of the definitions of kitsch is what, as Sontag lays it out, is when you're going for something and you fall a little bit short. Or camp. And I feel like this is that, where it's like, he still looks a little too swishy, maybe, for it to pull off.
Really bright rouge on.
And the makeup,
He's wearing too much makeup to really sell this look. But then also the one where they're like, what if you try with a wine jug?
Right.
You know, like, maybe that would be the
That's
thing.
going to butch it up.
But I love that we have all of the versions. Part of what I love about this collection is just that we have, this isn't even all the versions that we're showing you. There's probably 10 more or 20 more versions of the
You know
sailor.
the exact number, I'm sure.
I don't, but for me, the bare feet is really what seals this.
Yeah.
And the shadows, like, I'm imagining myself saying to a student, like, well, if you step away from the background just a little bit, the light can wrap around. But they're just like, you know, all the lighting is wrong, which is delightful. I mean, the shadow, especially the one on, what is it for you guys, on the left? I guess it's the same. That shadow is like making the photograph. It's gorgeous.
The flowers again.
Mhm.
It's a recurring theme.
And the lights were hot. He's schwitzy, you know. You can really see it. Again, I think the color is describing that in particular. Psychedelic.
Okay. For those in the audience familiar with the also queer actress Tallulah Bankhead at Wright, this is her pet lion cub named Winston Churchill. And we have two amazing pictures of Mark Lutz with the lion.
Wow.
It's the makeup's unhinged. Like, they really were just, I think, not used to the color film, because I don't think anyone's ever been going for that. But I love thinking, like, you're going for something and you just fall short. Like, they went all in and it just didn't quite.
It's still hot, though.
Definitely.
Is his face that much closer to the camera, or is it the yellow that makes it look like, it's just, yeah, it looks like he's sticking his neck very far forward.
I think the yellow is doing a lot of the work.
Okay.
And then also,
Separating.
it seems like he's typically, I think, this is all conjecture, but I think he's shooting indoors, potentially at night, with this one light source. And I think he's open very wide and has a very shallow depth of field. And so a lot of the pictures, like, miss the the focus doesn't quite hit, and he doesn't have a big range to play in, and it makes things look a little bit weird. You think that's right?
Oh, absolutely. And here we're getting to the good stuff.
Yeah, this is
It's all good stuff. But I really love these ones with this bathing suit. And there are multiple, we'll see throughout, there are multiple kind of like nude sittings. And one question that we were kind of wondering, and maybe you know more about this, is like, I mean, he was working at such a volume. I think he probably had a lab that was, you know, like was being funded by him or something. But where would you even get this developed? Because there wouldn't be the technology to develop this at home, I don't think, at this time. So I think you would need to have a trusted technician, because this actually would have been very dangerous, I think, to bring to someone else. Other photographers of the same period, like George Platt Lyons, who was working a little bit later, but also simultaneously had an in-house team of people for this very reason, is that you couldn't bring it someplace.
I think absolutely yes, but I also see the poses where he's nude also, I think, dance around being academic.
Totally.
Right? Like, this is not a pornographic view of Mark Lutz. This is something that could, it's a contrapposto pose. It could be a life study model, life drawing class. Yeah. There are some where maybe it's a little further from that realm, but I mean, yeah, that is an excellent question. And Maybe somewhere in the Van Vechten papers, there is documentation of where he had his color film processed. I would encourage someone with the tenacity to wade through the biggest archive you've ever seen in your life to dig into that at Yale, but that is a really valid question to ask about these.
Well, I've been also, I mean, it makes me think I've been learning a lot about Harvey Milk and Castro Camera through your work, but that whole idea that like Castro Camera existed because there wasn't a safe place to bring film like this, and we're talking about decades later. So certainly, you know, there's danger in all of it. Or, you know, Jim Bidgood, who made all of his work in his apartment and, you know, was like an illegal pornographer, which is part of why it was happening in like a, you know, a corner of a dark room.
I'm so glad that James Bidgood came up in conversation, someone who you were friends with and who am also a master of the messy backdrop and a glitter queen himself. And so I wonder, do you think that James knew about these color Van Vechten works? Do you think he was just a true original and had no influence?
I don't know. I never asked him about Van Vechten, but I think Jim was really coming from, he was interested in pageants and fashion and advertising, and I think that was informed through something else. And obviously also was a drag queen. I mean, early on, an early drag queen in the 50s. So I think if he knew about, how would he know about them? Isn't this the first time anyone's seeing them, like right now?
Well, I guess the black and white ones were quite widely circulated of like the Harlem Renaissance people in his studio and stuff like that.
I would be shocked if Jim knew. I mean, maybe, I can't say for sure, but certainly they were in psychic dialogue.
Now we can claim,
yeah.
So I have failed at moderating in that I thought we'd be much further along in this very large deck of slides.
Yeah.
So, but I think what I'm hoping we can do is for 5 minutes each, go through the slides that are in your section and talk about your own work in relation to the Mark Lutz slides that are there.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to hand this over to you because you're first.
I can do it, yeah.
You can do it.
I click this one.
So right, yeah.
Great. I just have 5 quick slides of a project that I'm working on, which I thought would be interesting in relation to this. I have been photographing, this is a picture of Rachel sitting here, photographing a model named Cole Pitts. And it's this guy who I noticed was like this, he's a painter actually, he makes his own paintings. I noticed he was modeling for a lot of gay photographers in New York, and I was seeing him pop up on everyone's Instagram feeds, and he was being photographed by everyone. And so I thought, I was like, ooh, I kind of want to photograph him too. But instead I decided I really just kind of wanted to be in the room while all of these other people photographed him. And so these are all pictures that I have taken of many different, I guess now I've done like 20 different photographers as they photograph Cole. And so they decide on the location, they plan what's going to happen in the shoot, and then I just try and be a fly on the wall. But it's something I've been doing for about 2 years now, where I've never really photographed the same model for that long. Most of my projects are really dependent on place. Excuse me, so like I've done an extensive project about Fire Island, where I was really working there for more than 5 years, almost exclusively. And that's why I was partly very happy to see LaToya Ruby Frazier's work in the show upstairs, because for her, it's like she's returned to this place over and over for many years that she's from in Braddock. And so, but in this project, there literally is a muse who is this guy, Cole, this is a shoot that we did on Fire Island with a friend of his. And so, yeah, I'm just really interested in kind of like, what are the scenarios of these photo shoots that are happening? And thank you. There's a photographer named Quill Lemons. And so actually he lives near me. So part of what it is we get, this photographer also lives near where I live in Bed-Stuy, and so we could go over to his house. And for me, there's usually just 1 or 2 pictures from the shoot that I think are kind of, work on their own. And it's kind of behind the scenes. But I think it's, overall, it's kind of about this dynamic of photographer and muse. And so we've been talking a lot, actually, Cole and I, as we do these shoots, about, is there any power in being the muse? Is it, I think I know people, particularly people who have worked in the fashion industry, who would say, no, there's no power in being the muse, and this is just a completely helpless position. But I actually think, and talking to him, at least in this situation, you can kind of navigate scenarios where the muse is also kind of like partly authoring the photos. And I think that he feels that he's enough kind of in control of these situations that he's like has an authorship role. And I would say that in the work that we're looking at with like Mark Lutz and Carl Van Vechten, it absolutely seems like something where there's a dialogue going on, and it's not, Mark is taking up a lot of space in the pictures, obviously. It's many hundreds of pictures of him, but he also doesn't seem powerless and like he's just being dressed up like a paper doll. It seems to me very much like a dialogue. And so I guess we can cycle quickly through some of these. I couldn't narrow them down. I kept trying to add more and more. In fact, there's just so many of them.
Wait, I love the chest of it, though. Just go back.
Yeah.
Like, the lighting again, and then it's like a hole through them. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and he had so many textiles on it. But this I love. It's like, hold these Delft ducks or whatever, you know, like, but it ends up making this very graphic shape out of the double-breasted suit, and the background is like, has this sliver. Sometimes the messiness really just all comes together and creates something really kind of perfect in a way. They did a lot of these ones where it would be sort of him in front of a painting of a landscape, and it's, I don't know if it was, in this one he almost kind of blends into it, but I love that cap. This is one of the best ones. I love that. I mean, this, and if I unknowingly was influenced by this in some way, where I think a lot of my work has this very, it's like very dark, and the glint in the eye is something that I'm always really interested in a photograph. I love, I mean, one of the socks, it's like, we were talking about this, is like actually the fabric of the sock is depicted really stunningly. There's like velvet, I don't know, part of the bullfighter costume. Because it's like it's like the materials are very nice, and so it's like he's using them in this very messy way, but sometimes it all kind of like coalesces. This is the one for me. I think this is, I want to make t-shirts with this. It's, doesn't it look like it could be from like Todd Haynes' Poison, or like a new queer cinema of the early 90s? It could, it's just, I think that's an amazing, it's just incredible. Again, no idea what they were going for. But there's some that veer into like drag. Like this to me is not only like a, you know, it's like not only dress up, but there's like a gender thing that's very clearly happening, and it's also to do with the pose. It's almost like this is a little before the time of Deanna Vreeland, but he kind of looks like her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just so many. So here's where I should have edited some down probably. But I'll just click through. I mean, wow, come on. What more do you want? All right. Okay.
Okay. I feel a little bit in like a daze because I love listening to the two of you talk about photography. It's one of my favorite things. Okay, this is going to be hard for 5 minutes, so I'm just going to try. These are not photographs, surprisingly. So I'm mostly a painter. I'm also a video artist. I think of myself as like committed to the daily practice of painting, but all of these are sort of based on Slim Aaron's photographs. But where I'm drawing a connection, which I did not think about until just now, is that these are made up of an archive of photos that I found over the last like 5 years, 6 years, from amateur porn sites, about 90% of that archive. And so in that way, I'm starting to think about like people just in the corner of their house taking these intimate photographs, and I had not drawn that connection at all. So in some way, like these are, does anyone know Slim Aaron's? Does that draw? Okay. This is actually one of the famous Slim Aaron's photographs. And so with his work, I sort of empty out all the people in it, often emptying out some of the artwork, and then repopulate it with queer women in a pleasure party scenario, ages about 60 and up. I don't really know because I'm not meeting them. Again, a lot of these images come from porn. This one does have my grandmother, so that one I do know. She's right there, the one in the front standing. But yeah, so it's interesting to think about that relationship of intimacy of like the apartment, of kind of that like small world. And then in some way kind of making them into this larger poolside landscape. again, made the same way. This one probably has my grandmother and mother in there as well, but for the most part, it will be people that I found on the internet. And so something about Slim Aarons that I thought was interesting, and if you don't know who he is, he's a lifestyle photographer from the 60s, a little bit of the 70s. And he said about his work that he makes photographs of attractive people doing attractive things in attractive places. And so I was like, I see you, I'm gonna take your places, and I'll kind of up you what I think attractive people are and what they would be doing. So again, are these women all queer? I don't know, but they are somewhat queer in the images that I find them in. And so that archive is made from like searching amateur porn, but also, you know, wild Google searches like trans-inclusive lesbian softball team 60 and up, and just like see what happens. And like sometimes it will bring you in really strange places, or like lesbian granny porn heels on. And then we shall see. The other part of my practice, and I'm really condensing this for the 5 minutes, is that I make videos. I'm an every now and then video artist. Most of them have been starring my mother. A lot of them has also had my grandmother's friends, my mother's friends in them. But I just made a project that at once did not have my mother. She was so relieved, so relieved. But before I get there, I will say the other thing that I think about your prop closet a lot, and now I think about Carl's prop closet a lot, and it almost feels like endless. Like when I enter yours, it's like, I know it's not endless, but it feels endless, and so that's the world that I want to live in. And so when I'm making, constructing a set, it's sort of meant to feel like there's just like a lot of material access there. But I just filmed something also in Fire Island at the Belvedere, which is a gay men's guest house. And I often joke that it's mostly just for orgies, but you can, I don't know if that's the only thing that happens there. It seems to be the only thing I ever hear about there. But they did let me come in and film like a lesbian bacchanal there. This is a film still. I don't have any actual video to show you, but a couple film stills. This video starred Penny Arcade, so this is where I veered off from having my mother. And this was the first time that I ever directed an iconic performer, also who loved props and really like came into herself a lot through the act of props. I believe we took a prop from her right before before this moment. But you know, in that, what I learned through that and reminded myself is that I do think that props sort of let you get into a character, and then you can remove the orange and maybe still have the essence of that photograph that we saw. But in this case, yes. Yes, oh my God, that would have been amazing. 1,000% there probably were Delft ducks in the back room, and we'll get into the details of where that room was, but they basically shoved everything, because they're only gonna let lesbians take over the Belvedere at the end of the season, and so they had already closed up shop, pushed everything into the back room, and then sort of like, I guess you can take something from there. So I did have my first experience of an endless prop closet. And I didn't think to put ducks in her hand, but I'm certain that they were there.
I'm thinking just about, sorry, you keep talking about the props being transformative, and I did this like very weird Joan Jonas workshop in grad school, which I won't get into.
Oh, I wish you would.
But we can talk about that over dinner. Okay. But she did say one thing that really stuck with me, which is when you wear a hat, you get to be a different person. And I just was like, whoa, that's the truest thing anybody's ever said. And I think that's kind of what you're saying about like these props. So like if you're holding two ducks, you get to be a different person.
And I think that it's not always great for the image or for the performance, but it can get you somewhere great. Because oftentimes I'm like, let's take that prop away. But I think that it kind of allows you to kind of like let something down. So what I was showing you previously was film stills that I grabbed from the footage, but this is just like a little behind the scenes insight. So this video is the first time that I'm blending my paintings, the world that I create in my paintings with the world that I create in video, which has never really existed in kind of, with anything more than like 4 or 5 people on screen at one time. But in this video, we ended the end scene as like a big pleasure party meant to reenact or have a live staging of something you might see in one of my paintings, which was incredibly strange because I've been making these paintings for so long and really believing that they could be real in some way, like, or understanding that they cannot be real for all the reasons that a lesbian pleasure party for women 60 to 90 doesn't happen in luxurious settings, but believing it enough to keep making it, and then suddenly I found myself in it, and it's still kind of blowing my mind. This feels like a natural progression from like what I love about Slim Aarons and these kind of like aspirational locations.
Yeah, I didn't see, somehow we like saw different parts of the archive because I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. The ones with the natural light are really,
yeah. I would love to hear the photographers talk about these. I love that.
These felt very you. Like, yeah, I think I could see why you chose these ones.
Yeah.
And they look like they're from the 80s.
They definitely look like they're from the 80s. That's so good.
I mean, it's something I think about with like Cecil Beaton's photographs, that the black and white makes them look like they're from never. Like a balloon in a Cecil Beaton photograph looks like an alien form I've never seen before. But I think if I saw, you know, if Cecil Beaton suddenly, like those pictures were in color, it would look like a balloon. It wouldn't have that sort of like alien form. And here it's like, these look like that satin curtain or these satin pajamas. Like I can touch, I can imagine them as tangible.
I love this one. Because like you're saying, Matt, like this would be like maybe going for something butch, but like really, really not.
It's a reach.
It's a reach, but I think that it was there. And I don't know what's happening here, but because I've only seen these photographs in relationship to a couple or, you know, from one lover to the other, I'm just assuming this is like the prelude to the threesome. Okay.
And what is that? You know the name of that person who's in those photographs?
Yeah, and I think he reappears in Rachel's slides too. But
is he the Cole Pitts of that time?
Yes, he is actually. He really is. So he was we don't know a lot about him. His name was Alan Meadows. He lived in Harlem, and he was a model and a dancer. And the only text about him describes both him and Carl Van Vechten's photographs of him circulating the gay scene, the queer scene in Harlem in the 30s. So we know very little, but we have his picture.
So, you know, I mentioned earlier my studio is a corner of an apartment in Harlem, and that's something I actually also didn't really think about until we got here today.
I didn't either.
But so all of these, everything you're about to see was made in a corner of my apartment in Harlem. And I'm tacking fabrics to the wall and setting things up. Occasionally I get a co-star like this snake named Bumblebee, but usually it's just me and my friends and family and collaborators. But all of my pictures are made in camera. So this is a picture of my grandmother and my aunt. This was a project I did that was thinking about Oscar Wilde's play Salome, which, if you've read it, is like densely beautiful, poetic text, but for very many reasons, I won't do the whole lecture on Salome, is not often performed. One of them is that I just think it's a little cumbersome as a play. Like there's a lot of just people standing there and like saying very beautiful things for a long time. So I wanted to kind of give that poetic text a different physical form by letting the language exist as a visual experience. And I was thinking a lot about reading as a visual experience and the process of making meaning, superseding, arriving at any particular meaning, so that in some of the more, you know, chaotic images, you might pull out a vertical line, you know, two vertical lines connected by a horizontal line and understand that that symbol is H, and then start to try and build a word out of that and either arrive at it or not. But that it might change the way you look at an image was something I was interested in. So you can see here, like, this idea that I'm, like, cutting this paper text and physically dispersing it throughout the space. So the word well is on the back wall. Those letters are, I don't know, 8 or 10 inches tall. And then daughter, the DAU, is on this curtain, and they're probably 4.5 inches tall, and then GHTER is like 3 inches, and that's on plexiglass really close to the camera. My grandmother, pictured here, is probably 92, something like that, and I just loved, we were really struggling to get the curtain to stay in the exact right place for the word daughter to be legible, and so I asked her to kind of pantomime holding the curtain, and she really pantomimed it, like it's very floating around it. And I just love that it's, you know, it's kind of like those mistakes that I love so much in the Van Vechten photographs, or, you know, like Cindy Sherman, who will show the seams, not blend something, or Jim Bidgood, who, you know, there's like a great Valentine's picture in this heart-shaped trellis, and if you look at the shadows in that photograph, they're just scribbled in with pencil. Like, he just went in onto the trellis and was like, shadows, and colored them in. And I just love, it's so good, and it's so photography. Like, it's, you know, like that ability to like see, there's a Julia Margaret Cameron photograph called I Wait, which is a picture of like a little cherub, and you look at it and you see a cherub, and then it's also a photograph, so it's also like a child with the severed wings of a dead swan tied to its back. And it's like both of those things at the same time always. So I'm interested in that photographic ability. And then also, like Van Vechten, I maybe don't know as famous or sparkly of people, but I am, well, Jack's famous, I guess, but I'm photographing the people that populate my life. So this is the performer and tour de force artist Jack Ferver, and then my father. The text was always selected in collaboration with the sitter. My father has Parkinson's, and this like sitting up is actually like a very triumphant pose for him. It says, "How sweet the air is here," with a little exclamation point on his knee. And then the work becomes these immersive installations. So this is a photographic wallpaper of ampersands. I photographed ampersands. You know, it's like there's too many pictures, there's too much information, and then instead of giving you the white wall to rest, it's like and, which also feels like wild, not prose, poetry.
These are your really famous sitters.
And then these are my really famous sitters. So again, like in the spirit of looking at Van Vechten's work of Lutz, I thought it made sense to show that I also photograph the people of my life and artists that I admire and think of as the renowned peers of my moment. So the photographer, Matt Leifheit, the musician and composer, Emily Wells, and then, of course, Sam Nye. I think that's my last. Yeah, and then these were some Van Vechtens that I picked out. I'm really interested in an image changing over time, and that like this image, you know, when I first saw these, it's like you like gasp and clutch your pearls, and it's like it's a very disturbing first read. And I'm not sure that the second read is altogether less disturbing. It may or may not be. You know, I'm not here to make the final call on that, but like I'm talking about that picture of the child with the angel wings both being like an angel and like a dead animal tied to a baby. This picture can do two things at the same time, depending on how you're looking at it.
This one also.
But the blush is also just so sweet, like that he's a blushing. I mean, on the car ride here from the city, Matt was reading to me from, what was it, Firecracker? One of his novels. And there was this sort of like obsession with describing like the beautiful youth with the chiseled face of a Greek statue. As you know, like youth obsession is nothing new, but I love the idea that they're like, you know, trying to give him this boyish blush. The maracas, I guess, make more sense for that pose. The little gloves. I mean, it's just so sweet. It's like the little calf warmers. And then this is that model again. And I do think, well, first of all, we were talking about Samuel Fosso, and like these floors, I think is actually like, the image itself is very dramatic, but I think the floor is a lot of what I'm excited about in this picture. But it's would that it were, but I would love to see if these images could have had more bodies in general. Like, it's so nice to see this other figure enter in. This is the one with natural light. You see that, like, suddenly he's, like, such a real person. Like, there are moments when he's, like, such a real person. That light is insane. also the color being rendered through this early color film. I mean, something we were talking about when we were looking at the show is like old silver paper just has so much more silver in it. And when you look at those prints, they look so silvery. And I think also looking at like this early color film, it looks really different than, especially because we're seeing so much digital color imagery. But even color film today doesn't render color quite like this. The 80s, but also Samuel Sasso. Like there's like a lot happening. I don't need to talk about every single one of these.
I think this might be the last one.
Oh, look at that.
So look at that. You don't have to talk about them. I want to thank my fellow panelists so much. This has been so fun. And yes, if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand. Linnea will bring you a microphone and you can ask away.
How did all these get here? Did they come through Mark Lutz's will, and did he have any connection with this museum before?
Yeah, so Mark Lutz, he actually lived in Germantown. That is a point that I forgot to make at the start. So he and Carl met when in 1931 when Mark Lutz was still living in Richmond, Virginia, and then Mark Lutz and his mother moved to a house in Germantown. So he had a relationship with the museum in that we have lots of photos of him on the steps. He did come here a lot, and he had begun conversations with the museum about giving this work many years before he died. So we don't have a lot of great records of that, unfortunately, but a group of his work came, a group of his collection of Carl's pictures came here while he was still living, and then a second group that included these slides came as part of his will.
I looked at my reference book while you were talking earlier, and apparently he took some photos himself. I guess he was a photographer because I found a photo of Carl Van Vechten that was taken by Mark Lutz.
Yeah, so the question is about Mark Lutz as a photographer as well. So we do presume that when there is a picture of Carl Van Vechten, that there's someone behind the camera pulling the shutter. And if it's a sitting where we also have pictures of Mark and it's the same backdrop and, you know, there's a picture of them together and it's the same outfits, we presume that Mark would have been the person behind the camera. He was primarily a writer. So he was a journalist in Richmond. When he moved to Philadelphia, he was still dabbling in journalism. If you are of the generation that remembers Philco Television, he was the author of the staff newsletter for Philco TV. So he had a lot of sort of odd writing jobs. He was a collector of antique books. But again, because, you know, none of his papers survived, he had no direct descendants. He had no, you know, nieces or nephews or any sort of familial connection that we have been able to make to sort of learn more about him. What we know is very limited, unfortunately. These pictures are most of what we know, which is sort of incredible.
Do any of you have any feeling for whether there's been any deterioration in the slides and what effect that might have on the color and on the makeup, I guess, as well? Second part of that is what's being done at this point to preserve them?
Those are great questions. I will take them since I'm the curator here. I will say, and I should have said this up top, that the scans that you're seeing here are really me, a non-photographer with a slide scanner, just churning out scans. So I have not done any color correction. I have not done any of the professional work that one would do to see that this color is fully accurate. It is like close enough for rock and roll. And at some point, you know, in a queue of many, many things that need to be photographed at this museum, we will send them to professional photography to have copies made. They are currently in a climate-controlled storage and have been for many years. So they are in a good, safe, dark, cool place where they live most of the time when I'm not scanning them. And, you know, the question of color is complicated, but to me, they seem rich tonally. There's not, you know, I don't think there's been a lot of shifting. I think with Kodachrome from this period, if you keep it cool and dry and in a, a dark place, they do hold up pretty well.
I was just looking at some color slides by Pajama, which was a queer collective of the same time period. And when the Kodachrome from this time goes bad, it turns very dark. And so these seem like, even if the scans aren't color corrected, they seem like they're in extremely good condition. One of the things that is technical about slides is if you overexpose them, the information is not there. So I think the ones where you see really bright highlights, probably that's just the way it is.
I'd love to hear from the three artists on the panel. First, I thought your sort of micro presentations were really lovely in kind of outlining these perhaps unconscious genealogies or connections at least between your work and this wonderful archive. But I'd just be curious to hear kind of off the cuff reflections about now having had the experience of looking at these photographs. What next? What will you do with that experience and that information?
I have a very uninteresting answer, maybe, is that I also publish books. I have a publishing company called Matte Editions, M-A-T-T-E, and I would really like to make a publication of these because I think while they look, they're kind of the most beautiful to see them projected, and another thing is at this time there wasn't a really good way to print color, so these would have been shown as a projection, but I think to make a nice little album of them would be very sweet, and so that's one tangible goal that I have, is I would like to make a book that would be publicly available. But then I also think in my own work, I'm really now thinking a lot more about like long-term engagements with one subject, and also after seeing the show upstairs, just thinking about like what kind of greater kind of like emotionality you can pull out of a subject that you've really worked with a long time. I'm often photographing people that I don't know. I'm mostly photographing strangers, and it's almost like an act of projection where like the same way in like a cruising scenario, you might be able to just kind of project what you want onto another person, and that's the attraction. With photographing strangers, it's very similar, but really kind of deeply engaging with one subject, I think you often can arrive at something that's more earnest and more kind of like emotionally raw, which I think actually in some of these pictures there is because a portrait is really just the record of an interaction that photographer has with the subject. And I think in some of those, it's just very clear and direct, and part of what's so powerful about them.
I think my main thing is about like continued work with subjects. So the work I showed you guys was in a show last summer, which is now a long time ago. And I've been really struggling to make a next thing, except for that suddenly I have a show opening this spring, and that happened fast, and I haven't made anything. And I think part of it is that I've felt too familiar with my own process and my subjects, and it's something I never mind in other people's work. Like, I actually love to see the same subject again and again, or to see a technique slowly develop over time. And I think there is like an affirmation in the work that it would be okay if I photographed my same wonderful subjects again, which is really what I've done. Almost opposite to you. Like, I almost exclusively photograph people I know. And I think also a point of commonality is that it's not actually something I care about in other people's photographs. Like, I love like Bruce Gilden or somebody who's maybe not assuming an honorific form, but I really try and make my subjects look like themselves and feel good, which, those are things that can be defined differently for each subject. And I think that that's something that we haven't called him Uncle Carl, that Uncle Carl really, I think he thought people were beautiful, more so than he thought he was a great photographer. Like, he really wanted to have the subject. My show is going to be called Lover's Eye. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's like a miniature romantic painting of eyes. And so I've been really stuck on whose eyes to photograph, but I think I should probably photograph my dad's eye, right? I'm starting to I think this has been a moment to reflect on that.
I almost wish I could answer this question in like a year because I tend to ruminate on projects for a really long time before I make them. And then each project takes a long time to make. And having just come out of that shoot and really taking space from that and getting back into painting, I don't know, but I'm interested in this idea of like the repeated subject, and that doesn't really happen in my work except for the places that my mother and grandmother, and then there's a couple, I've gotten lucky over the many years of like creating this archive of finding full photo shoots that take place between people on these amateur porn sites, and so I do find that I like return to those couples a lot, and so I don't know, maybe that's in there, but I don't know.
I also just want to say, you know, you were kind of talking about a witting or unwitting lineage, and we talked about, like, did Jim Bidgood know about these pictures? And, like, I think especially when it comes to queer photography, it makes sense to make up those lineages. Like, a lot of this stuff was hidden, and I don't think it matters if so-and-so knew what so-and-so was doing. Like, I create this line from, like, F. Hollanday to Jim Bidgood to me, and I made that up. I don't know, you know, but I think it works. And so I think this kind of can fit into that same logic.
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's one more question, we have time to answer it. And otherwise, we'll invite everybody to take the elevator right here, one floor up, and see the show itself. All right, we got one more over there.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm just interested about like the private aspect of these photographs. And earlier you were talking about truth. And, you know, truth is like such a central theme for like photographic history, and like what we make, or what you guys make of the like private aspect, and like how like the private truth, or I don't know, just like something about that, if you could maybe speak to how you guys see that operating in this work.
It's something we did talk about kind of extensively before this panel. Is like, I guess this is a quote from David Wojnarowicz's Close to the Knives, is that it's a very dangerous thing to make private things public. I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, I think we're of kind of different minds about that. I mean, I am just like so grateful that we have these materials and that I can look at them, and my whole thing, I think actually creating greater access to them would be very exciting, because you're the only people, aside from people who work at the museum, who have seen these so far. But then, of course, there are questions of would the subject want them to have been seen? I do think Uncle Carl would have wanted them to be seen, probably, but and then I think it's something that is a big question in working with archives in general, and not just artist archives. It's like there are so many things that exist in institutional collections, like the private sex diaries of Edith Wharton or whatever, that she might not have wanted people to see, but have ended up in these institutions and are publicly available. So I think there is a responsibility on behalf of researchers and curators to just like have conversations about these things, and to not take that transition from private to public and lightly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, part of the struggle with this is that all of the information we have about the degree to which Mark Lutz was in the closet, or the degree to which Mark Lutz didn't want information out in the world about his queerness, comes third hand. So it doesn't come from himself. It comes from one text that was written by somebody who may or may not have been closeted themselves, and who definitely used a lot of closeted terminology like good friend instead of lover, right? So the information that gives me pause about sharing these images as a curator and also as a queer person is a lot of hearsay, and it's unreliable, and it's not coming from the person who's being photographed, and it's not coming from the person who took the photographs. And it still is like a lot to wrestle with and think about, but I ultimately landed at a place where I think there's more good than harm done by sharing, because it does, you know, it's, as Matt has said many times, like, it is so valuable to see this kind of imagery from a past moment, especially in color. It just feels so relatable, and from a time when it was so challenging to even make this kind of picture. So, you know, I'm really excited to see where things go with Matt, the magazine and the person, and, you know, to continue to share this work as, you know, in a way that feels responsible and respectful.
I just have so much more reverence for the living than I do for the dead. And I just think, like, at the end of the day, if it's, like, for the people, you know, and if it's for the people, I just have no sense of spirituality. So for me, it's like, I cannot imagine it affecting him, and I can't imagine it affecting us. And it's just cut and dry for me in that regard. I do think, you know, it's something we think about a lot with, why do I always lose his name? I keep thinking Wegman. It's not Wegman.
Dog.
Yeah, whatever. Winogrand. That Winogrand died with all of this, like, unprocessed film, and then we processed it. And I do think, like, we should look at that stuff. But Winogrand also wasn't, like, confused. He was deliberately not processing that film. So having that be part of the conversation is really relevant. This is one that he chose, and this is one that we chose. And I think those have different levels of authorship. But, yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ways that, I think initially I'm like, oh, whatever,